Welcome to Fortune Forecast. You are in my book playlist where we have started on the book titled The Book of Life by Upton Sinclair. It was published in 1921 by the Payne Book Company and it is in the public domain. I am Daisy, your hostess, and if you're new to my channel, welcome. Okay, so we've been through a few of the chapters already, and in the last chapters 4 and 5, the author moves on to talk about the influence of man and nature and man's attempt to show how he can control nature. And even though the book was published in 1921, within just the last 2 years, I recall an article which I will put a link here in the description from The Guardian, which was talking about some of the concerns regarding drought throughout the United States. The article was about cloud seeding experiments, and they mentioned that these experiments have been taking place since the 1940s. And cloud seeding involves using an aircraft or as recent as using even drones to add small particles of silver iodide to clouds to spur a rainfall. This is an example of man controlling nature. What are your thoughts? Should man interfere in nature's process? That is a great segue to the introduction of Chapter 6, Man the Rebel. Shows the transition stage between instinct and reason, in which man finds himself and how he can advance to a securer condition. In the state of nature, you find every creature living a precarious existence, incessantly beset by enemies, and the creature survives only so long as it keeps itself at the top of its form. The result is the maintenance of the type in its full perception, and under the competitive pressure, a gradual increase of its powers. Excepting when sudden eruptions of natural forces occur, every creature is perfectly provided with a set of instincts for all emergencies. It is in harmonious relationship to its environment. It knows how to do what it has to do, and even its fears and its pains serve for its protection. But now comes man and overthrows this state of nature, abolishes the competitive struggle, and changes at his own insolent will both his environment and his reaction thereto. Man's changes are, in the beginning, all along one line. They are for his own greater comfort, the avoidance of the inconveniences of nature, and the stresses of the competitive struggle. In a state of nature, there are no fat animals, but in civilization, there are not merely fat animals, but fat men to eat the fat animals. In a state of nature, no animal loafs very long. It has to go out and hunt its food. But man, by his superior cunning, compels the animals to work for him and also his fellow men. So he produces unlimited wealth for himself. Not merely can he eat and drink and sleep all he wants, but he builds a whole elaborate set of laws and moral customs and religious codes about this power. He invents manners and customs and literatures and arts expressive of his superiority to nature and to his fellow men, and of his ability to enslave and exploit them. So he destroys for his imperious self the beneficent guardianship which nature had maintained over him. He develops 1,000 complicated diseases, 1,000 monstrous abnormalities of body and mind and spirit. And each one of these diseases and abnormalities is a new life of its own. It develops a body of knowledge, a science, and perhaps an art. It becomes the means of life, the environment, and the determining destiny of thousands, perhaps millions of human beings. So continues the growth of the colossal structure which we call civilization, in part still healthy and progressive, but in part as foul and deadly as a gigantic cancer. What is to be done about this cancer? First of all, it must be diagnosed, the extent of it precisely mapped out, and the causes of it determined. Man, the rebel, has rejected his mother nature and has lost, and for the most part, forgotten the instincts with which she provided him. He has destroyed the environment which, however harsh to the individual, was beneficent to the race, and has set up in the place of it a gigantic pleasure house with talking machines and moving pictures and soda fountains and manicure parlors and gents' furnishing establishments. Shall we say that man is to go back to a state of nature, that he shall no longer make asylums for the insane and homes for the defective, eyeglasses for the astigmatic, and malted milk for the dyspeptic? There are some who preach that. Among the multitude of strange books and pamphlets which come in my mail, I found the other day a volume from England, Social Chaos and the Way Out, by Alfred Baker Reed, a learned and imposing tome of 364 pages, wherein with all the paraphernalia of learning it is gravely maintained that the solution for the ills of civilization is a return to the ancient Greek practice of infanticide. Every child at birth is to be examined by a committee of physicians, and if it is found to possess any defect, or if the census has established that there are enough babies in the world for the present, this baby shall be mercifully and painlessly asphyxiated. You might think that this is a joke, after the fashion of Swift's proposal for eating the children of famine-stricken Ireland. I have spent some time examining this book before I risk committing myself to the statement that it is the work of a sober scientist with no idea whatever of fun. If we are going to think clearly on this subject, the first point we have to understand is that nature has nothing to do with it. We cannot appeal to nature because we are many thousands of years beyond her sway. We left her when the first ape came down from the treetop and fastened a sharp stone in the end of his club. We bade irrevocable goodbye to her when the first man kept himself from freezing and altered his diet by means of fire. Therefore, it is no argument to say that this, that, or the other remedy is unnatural. Our choice will lie among 1,000 different courses, but the one thing we may be sure of is that none of them will be natural. Bairnsfather, in one of his war cartoons, portrays a British officer on leave who got homesick for the trenches and went out into the garden and dug himself a hole in the mud and sat shivering in the rain all night. And this amuses us vastly, but we should be even more amused if any kind of reformer, physician, moralist, clergyman, or legislator should suggest to us any remedy for our ills that was really according to nature. Civilized man, creature of art and of knowledge, has no love for nature except as an object for the play of his fancy and his wit. He means to live his own life. He means to hold himself above nature with all his powers. Yet, obviously, he cannot go on accumulating diseases. He cannot give his lifeblood to the making of a cancer while his own proper tissues starve. He must somehow divert the flow of his energies, his social bloodstream, so to speak, from the cancer to the healthy growth. To abandon the metaphor, man will determine by the use of his reason what he wishes life to be. He will choose the highest forms of it to which he can attain. He will then, by the deliberate act of his own will, devote his energies to those tasks. He will make for himself new laws, new moral codes, new customs and ways of thought, calculated to bring to reality the ideal which he has formed. So only can man justify himself as a creator. So can he realize the benefit and escape the penalties of his own revolt from his ancient mother. And then, perhaps, we shall make the discovery that we have come back to nature, only in a new form. Nature, harsh and cruel, wasteful and blind as we call her, yet had her deep wisdom. She cared for the species, she protected and preserved the type. Man, in his new pride of power, has invented a philosophy which he dignifies by the name of individualism. He lives and works for himself. He chooses to wear silk shirts and to break the speed limit and to pin ribbons and crosses on his chest. Now, what he must do with his new morality, if he wishes to save himself from degeneration, is to manifest the wisdom and far vision of the old mother whom he spurned, and to say to himself deliberately, as an act of high daring, I will protect the species. I will preserve the type. I will deny myself the raptures of alcoholic intoxication because it damages the health of my offspring. I will deny myself the amusement of sexual promiscuity for the same reason. I will devise imitations of the chase and of battle in order that I may keep my physical body up to the best standard of nature. Because I understand that all civilized life is based upon intelligence, I will acquire knowledge and spread it among my fellow men. Because I perceive that civilization is impossible without sympathy, and because sympathy makes it impossible for me to be happy while my fellow men are ignorant and degraded. Therefore, I dictate my energies to the extermination of poverty, war, parasitism, and all forms of exploitation of man by his fellows. Professor William James is the author of an excellent essay entitled A Moral Equivalent for War. He sets forth the idea that men have loved war through the ages because it has called forth their highest efforts, has made them more fully aware of the powers of their being. He asks, may it not be possible for man, of his own free impulse, born of his love of life and the wonderful potentialities which it unfolds, to invent for himself a discipline, a code based not upon the destruction of other men and their enslavement, but upon cooperative emulation in the unfoldment of the powers of the mind? That this can be done by men, I have never doubted. That it will be done, and done quickly, has been made certain by the late world conflict, which has demonstrated to all thinking people that the progress of the mechanical arts has been such that man is now able to inflict upon his own civilization more damage than it is able to endure. End of chapter 6. Stay here. All right. Go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to share this with your friends. Are you ready? I'm ready to turn the page to chapter 7, titled Making Our Morals. Attempts to show that human morality must change to fit human facts, and there can be no judge of it save human reason. Assuming the argument of the preceding chapters to be accepted, it appears that human life is in part at least a product of human will, guided by human intelligence. Man finds himself in the position of the crew of a ship in the middle of the ocean. He does not know exactly how the ship was made or how it came to be in its present position, but he has discovered how the engines are run and how the ship is steered and the meaning of the compass. So now he takes charge of the ship and keeps it afloat amid many perils. And meantime, on the bridge of the vessel, there goes on a furious argument over the question, what port the ship shall be steered to and what chart shall be used. It is not well as a rule to trust two similes, but this simile is useful because it helps us to realize how fluid and changeable are the conditions of man's life, and how incessant and urgent the problems with which he finds himself confronted. The moral and legal codes of mankind may be compared to the steering orders which are given to the helmsman of the vessel. Northeast by north, he is told, and if during the night a heavy wind arises and pushes the bow of the vessel off to starboard, then the helmsman has to push the wheel in the opposite direction. If he does not do so, he may find that his vessel has swung around and is going to some other part of the world. Next morning, the passengers may wake up and find the ship on the rocks, because the helmsman persisted in following certain steering directions which were laid down in an ancient Hebrew book 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. If life is a continually changing product, then the laws which govern conduct must also be continually changing, and morality is a problem of continuous adjustment to new circumstances and new deeds. If man is free to work upon this changing environment, he must be free to make new tools and devise new processes. If it is the task of reason to choose among many possible courses and many possible varieties of life, then clearly it is man's duty to examine and revise every detail of his laws and customs and moral codes. This is, of course, in flat contradiction to the teachings of all religions. So far as I know, there is no religion which does not teach that the conduct of man in certain matters has been eternally fixed by some higher power, and that it is man's duty to conform to these rules. It is considered to be wicked even to suggest any other idea. In fact, to do so is the most wicked thing in the world, far more dangerous than any actual infraction of the code, whatever it may be. Let us see how this works out in practice. Let us take for a test the 10 Commandments. These commandments were graven upon stone tablets some 4,000 years ago and are supposed to have been valid ever since. Thou shalt not kill is one. Thou shalt do no murder. And in this double version, we see at once the beginnings of controversy. If you are a Quaker, you accept the former version, while if you are a member of the military general staff of your country, you accept the latter. You maintain the right to kill your fellow men, provided that those who do the killing have been previously clad in a special uniform, indicating their distinctive function as killers of their fellow men. You maintain, in other words, the right of making war, and presently, when you get into making war, you find yourself maintaining the right to kill, not merely by the old established method of the sword and the bullet, but by means of poison gases which destroy the lives of women and children, perhaps a whole city full at a time. And also, of course, you maintain the right to kill, provided the killing has been formally ordered and sanctioned by a man who sits upon a raised bench and wears a black robe and perhaps a powdered wig. You consider that by the simple device of putting this man into a black robe and a powdered wig, you endow him with authority to judge and revise the divine law. In other words, you subject this divine law to human reason. And if some religious fanatic refuses to be so subjected, you call him by the dread name pacifist. And if he attempts to preach his idea, you send him to prison for 10 or 20 years, which means in actual practice that you kill him by the slow effects of malnutrition and tubercular infection. If he is ordered to put on the special costume of killing and refuses to do so, you call him a CO, and you bully and beat him and perhaps administer to him the water cure in your dungeons. Or take the commandment that we shall not commit adultery. Surely this is a law about which we can agree. But presently we discover that unhappily married couples desire to part, and that if we do not allow them to part, we actually cause the commission of a great deal more adultery than otherwise. Therefore, our wise men meet together and revise this divine law and decide that it is not adultery if a man takes another wife, provided he has received from a judge an engraved piece of paper permitting him to do so. But some of the followers of religion refuse to admit this right of mere and mortal men. The Catholic Church attempts to enforce its own laws and declares that people who divorce and remarry are really living in adultery and committing mortal sin. The Episcopal Church does not go quite so far as that. It allows the innocent party in the divorce to remarry. Other churches are content to accept the state law as it stands. Is it not manifest that all these groups are applying human reason, and nothing but human reason, to the interpreting and revising of their divine commandments? Or take the law, thou shalt not steal. Surely we can all agree upon that. Let us do so, but our agreement gets us nowhere, because we have to set up a human court to decide what is stealing. Is it stealing to seize upon land and kill the occupants of it and take the land for your own and hand it down to your children forever? Yes, of course, that is stealing, you say. But at once you have to revise your statement. It is not stealing if it was done a sufficient number of years ago. In that case, the results of it are sanctified by law and held unchangeable forever. Also, we run up against the fact that it is not stealing if it is done by the state, by men who have been dressed up in the costume of killers before they commit the act. Again, is it stealing to hold land out of use for speculation while other men are starving and dying for lack of land to labor upon? Some of us call this stealing, but we are impolitely referred to as radicals. And if we venture to suggest that anyone should resist this kind of stealing, we are sentenced to slow death from malnutrition and tubercular infection. Again, is it stealing for a victim of our system of land monopoly to take a loaf of bread in order to save the life of his starving child? The law says that this is stealing and sends the man to jail for this act. Yet the common sense of mankind protests, and I have heard a great many respectable Americans venture so far in radicalism as to say that they themselves would steal under such circumstances. One could pile up illustrations without limit, but this is enough to make clear the point that it is perfectly futile to attempt to talk about divine rules for human conduct. Regardless of any ideas you may hold or any wishes, you are forced at every hour of your life to apply your reason to the problems of your life, and you have no escape from the task of judging and deciding. All that you do is to judge right or to judge wrong, and if you judge wrong, you inflict misery upon yourself and upon all who come into contact with you. How much more sensible, therefore, to recognize the fact of moral and intellectual responsibility, to investigate the data of life in which you have to deal, the environment by which you are surrounded, and to train your judgment so you will be able to fit yourself to it with quickness and certainty. But the believer in religion will say, this leaves mankind without any guide or authority. How can human beings act? How can they deal with one another if there are no laws, no permanent moral codes? The answer is that to accept the idea of the evolution of morality does not mean at all that there will be no permanent laws and working principles. Many of the facts of life are fixed for all practical purposes. The purpose is not merely of your life and my life, but the life of many generations. We are not likely to see in our time the end of the ancient Hebrew announcement that the sins of the father are visited upon the children. Therefore, it is possible for us to study out of a course of action based upon the duty of every father to hand down to his children the gift of a sound mind in a sound body. The Catholic Church has had for 1,000 years or more the mortal sin of gluttony upon its list. And today comes experimental science with its new weapons of research and discovers auto-intoxication and the hardening of the arteries, and makes it very unlikely that the moral codes of men will ever fail to list gluttony as a mortal sin. Indeed, science has added to gluttony not merely drunkenness, but all use of alcoholic liquor for beverage purposes. We have done this in spite of the manifest fact that the drinking of wine was not merely an Old Testament virtue, but a New Testament religious rite. To say that human life changes and that new discoveries and new powers make necessary new laws and moral customs is to say something so obvious that it might seem a waste of paper and ink. Man has invented the automobile and has crowded himself into cities, and so has to adapt a rigid set of traffic regulations. So far as I know, it has never occurred to any religious enthusiast to seek in the book of Revelation for information as to the advisability of the left-hand turn at Broadway and 42nd Street, New York, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But modern science has created new economic facts just as unprecedented as the automobile. It has created new possibilities of spending and new possibilities of starving for mankind. It has made new cravings and new satisfactions, new crimes and new virtues. And yet the great mass of our people are still seeking to guide themselves in their adjustments to these new facts by ancient codes, which have no more relationship to these facts than they have to the affairs of Mars. I am acquainted with a certain lady, one of the kindest and most devoted souls alive, who seeks to solve the problems of her life and of her large family of children and grandchildren according to sentences which she picks out more or less at random from certain more or less random chapters of ancient Hebrew literature. This lady will find some words which she imagines to apply to the matter, and she will shut her devout eyes to the fact that there are other texts bearing on the matter which say exactly the opposite. She will place the strangest and most unimaginable interpretations upon the words, and yet will be absolutely certain that her interpretation is the voice of God speaking directly to her. If you try to tell her about socialism, she will say, "The poor ye have always with you," which means that it is interfering with divine providence to try to remedy poverty on any large scale. This lady is ready instantly to relieve any single case of want. She regards it as her duty to do this. In fact, she considers that the purpose of some people's poverty is to provide her with a chance to do the noble action of relieving it. You would think that the meaning of the sentence, "spare the rod and spoil the child," would be so plain that no one could mistake it. But this good lady understood it to mean that God forbade the physical chastisement of children and preferred them spoiled. She held this idea for half a lifetime until it was pointed out to her that the sentence was not in the Bible, but in Hudibras, an old English poem. And we now come to the end of chapter 7. All right, my dear one, if you haven't done so, hit that like button, leave me a comment, let me know you were here, and head over to the next video where I will be there with chapter 8.